Investigators have found the black box from an Ethiopian Airlines plane that crashed on Sunday. The plane was heading to Nairobi, Kenyan capital, from Addis Ababa. The plane crashed 6 minutes after takeoff. All 157 people on board killed. The cause of the disaster is not yet clear. The pilot had reported difficulties and had asked to return to Addis Ababa. Ethiopian Airlines said it had grounded all of its 737 MAX 8s until further notice as an extra safety precaution. Cluster of storms ripped through the country's southeast region, spawning multiple tornadoes and leaving a trail of destruction. As many as 23 persons were killed in the U.S. state of Alabama. The reported deaths were all in Lee County, Alabama. 2 tornadoes, one at least a half-mile wide, wrecked homes and uprooted trees. Many homes suffered significant damages. Multiple agencies were working to assist in the search for injured people inside their homes. Alabama governor extended the state of emergency due to tornadoes and severe weather. President Trump calls for billions of dollars in additional spending for a wall along the southern border. The president will ask for $8.6 billion for a border wall. That comes after a partial government shutdown when Congress refused to give Trump $5.7 billion for a border wall in 2019. When the president signed a spending bill to reopen the government earlier this year, he simultaneously declared an emergency at the border. This was to avoid Congress and obtain additional funding for the border wall. The Senate is expected to vote on a resolution that revokes Trump's national emergency declaration. The House has already passed a resolution revoking the national emergency declaration. A measure is planned to make it to the president's desk. Trump has said he will veto the rejection of national emergency declaration if and when it gets to his desk. The question will then turn to whether enough Republicans in the Senate join Democrats to produce the 2/3 majority needed in each chamber to override a presidential veto, but this is historically rare. 28 players on the United States women's national soccer team filed a class action lawsuit Friday in Los Angeles. The lawsuit alleges gender-based discrimination by the U.S. Soccer Federation. The lawsuit was filed under the Equal Pay Act and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. All 28 female players claim that they are not paid equally to the men's national players. The women's national team won the World Cup in 2015. They're heading to France to defend their title at the 2019 World Cup. Latest on Jussie Smollett case. A check for a total of $3,500 written by Jussie Smollett to the 2 brothers were for training fee. The 36-year-old actor wrote a check on January 23, 2019, 6 days before Abel and his brother Ola reportedly faked a hate crime attack on Jussie Smollett in Chicago. The memo line on the check reads, 5-week nutrition workout program, Don't Go. Don't Go is a reference to a song that Smollett was going to appear in a music video for. Texts between the brothers and Smollett allegedly show them reminding him to do cardio and to stay on his meal plan. After 3 weeks of investigation, Chicago police announced that they believed Smollett made up the attack. Smollett is charged with disorderly conduct, false report, a Class 4 felony. He continues to maintain his innocence. The producers of the television show Empire have said that he will be cut from the final 2 episodes of the season. Smollett is currently free on a $100,000 bond. A woman and a homeless man who fabricated a heartwarming story that drew more than $400,000 in donations on GoFundMe pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges. Johnny Bobbitt pleaded guilty in federal court to one count of conspiracy to commit money laundering. He faces up to 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Caitlin McClure pleaded guilty to a count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She faces up to 20 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. The two also face state charges in New Jersey, as does Mark D'Amico, who was Ms. McClure's boyfriend when the crimes were committed. In 2017, Ms. McClure and Mr. D'Amico posted on GoFundMe, a crowdfunding site, that she had run out of gas and that Mr. Bobbitt, a homeless veteran, had spent his last $20 to buy gasoline for her. When the donation grew over $400,000, Ms. McClure and Mr. D'Amico spent most of the money on vacations, clothing, gambling, etc. They deposited just $25,000 to Mr. Bobbitt's bank account. Mr. Bobbitt sued the couple, stating that he had received just $75,000 in total and they had spent the rest. The federal authorities read more than 60,000 text messages sent by Ms. McClure and Mr. D'Amico and concluded that it was all a hoax. GoFundMe said that it would refund all donations for Mr. Bobbitt, calling the misbehavior on the platform unacceptable. Mr. D'Amico had not been charged by the federal authorities and denied any wrongdoing. A quick eye exam might one day allow eye doctors to check up on both your eyeglasses prescription and your brain health. Studies suggest the loss of blood vessels in the retina could signal Alzheimer's disease. In people with healthy brains, microscopic blood vessels form a dense web at the back of the eye inside the retina. In the eyes of people with Alzheimer's disease, that web was less dense and even sparse in places. With nearly 6 million Americans living with Alzheimer's disease and no viable treatments or non-invasive tools for early diagnosis, its burden on families and economy is heavy. Scientists have studied other changes in the retina that could signal trouble in the brain, such as thinning of some of the retinal nerve layers. Ultimately, the goal would be to detect Alzheimer's early before symptoms of memory loss are evident. The United States will withdraw its remaining diplomatic personnel from Venezuela this week as the socialist South American country plunges further into chaos. Some fear the oil-rich country could become a failed state. Fears of a Libya-style collapse in Venezuela are growing, a threat that has raised the specter of the 2012 assault on the American compound in Benzai that resulted in the death of U.S. ambassador to Libya. Venezuelans, already suffering from food and water shortages, have become so desperate during the current wave of blackouts that they have started looting stores. The humanitarian disaster is expected to intensify in coming weeks as newly imposed U.S. sanctions begin to ripple through the economy, potentially leading to gasoline shortages and even greater hunger. Though tense for years, U.S.-Venezuela ties began unraveling in January when the Trump administration called for President Nicolas Maduro to resign and recognize opposition leader Juan Guaido as the country's legitimate leader. In response, Maduro ordered the expulsion of U.S. diplomats. The United States in January also slapped strong sanctions on Venezuela's pivotal oil sector, effectively cutting off the nation's single largest source of hard currency, oil sales to the United States. A temporary agreement allowed a small number of personnel to remain in each nation's capitals as Washington and Caracas sought to establish more limited interest sections. There had already been a small staff of about 20 diplomatic personnel in addition to local staff at the U.S. Embassy complex in Caracas. But even running an embassy has become difficult in Venezuela. Hotels, embassies, and some restaurants have continued to run on generators, but those require diesel, which is also increasingly difficult to obtain. On this day 30 years ago, Tim Berners-Lee, a computer scientist, submitted a proposal with the title Information Management System. It began by asking how future scientists would keep track of their large projects. The proposal described what, in just a couple of years' time, would transform into the World Wide Web, a connected system for sharing information that would revolutionize how the entire planet communicated. Not to be confused with the Internet, which had been evolving since the 1960s. The World Wide Web is an online application built upon innovations like HTML language, URL addresses, and Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP. Prior to 1989, connected networks of computers had been up, running, and growing for a couple of decades. People had sent emails, shared files, ran message boards, and even created the first emoticons. When the World Wide Web came along, the Internet at large really began to take off. Web browsers, web pages, and hyperlinks made information easy to find and move between, and because the core code was open sourced, anyone could create a browser or website of their own. As World Wide Web trends on the microblogging website, let's look at some of the funniest tweets it has inspired. Sagar tweets, "The Internet has turned 30 today. Internet's mother must be blackmailing Internet to get married." Nipunji, in reply to Sagar, tweets, "Already married to electricity. Without it, Internet can't survive for long." Rahul Raj tweets, "World Wide Web turns 30 today. It must be going through a midlife crisis and thinking, what has it contributed to the world, or should it has taken a different path in life? Happy birthday, World Wide Web."